Hello, we're so glad that you joined us today for this new initiative from North Central University called Pastors Ongoing Education. North Central University for the last 90 years has been equipping and empowering Christian leaders and pastors. And we not only want to equip and empower our students for ministry, but we want to continue to be a resource to those pastors and leaders out in the field serving our communities every day. And so we've created this series of workshops to give you tools to work with your teams, to help you continue to grow in your leadership, in your organization, and in your personal formation. We hope you enjoy the sessions.
Okay, well, I'm going to invite Professor Neely Tamminga to come on up. She is one of our professors of business here. I reached out to Neely and just said, hey, would you come and give us some insight as to really good practices of how to have a tight-knit staff, how to handle conflict, how to just work through some stuff. And she is a phenomenal professor. I sent you her bio in the email so you can see she's very, very qualified. But here's what I want to tell you about Neely. I was working full-time here for 5 years, and Neely was the professor that was always in chapel because she always wanted to pray with our students. And she's our business faculty, but she has a heart to train up leaders in a beautiful way. She is deeply connected to her students, and so it's just an honor to have her share with our local pastors. These are my friends, my pastors from our district. So can you welcome Neely Tamminga?
I'm just gonna cry a little bit. So there's nobody who ministers to my soul during the last couple years, being a non-AG, non-Pentecostal, professor. It can feel like you're an outsider, and I have never for one day felt like an outsider because Christy specifically said, we're glad you're here because a lot of other people aren't either. So you need to actually talk about that so that they also see that they have a place and a space here at North Central. And the Holy Spirit has absolutely worked mightily through Christy in just praying over me. Specific messages, specific prayers. I'll tell you, my faith has grown because of you, Christy Kerr. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's make sure. You're like, what is Distill? Okay, Distill is actually my consultancy. And believe it or not, I work 2 jobs. And I work 2 jobs for joy. Not because I necessarily have to. I was on Wall Street for 20 years and walked away from that Wall Street life, which is an intense life. And when people are like, aren't you like really, really busy? I'm like, you don't know what it's like to work on a Wall Street career. Like you're working 80 to 90 hours all the time, every single week. I traveled 35 weeks out of the year on the road, but come in Minneapolis, lived here for the last 20 or 15 of my 20 years on Wall Street, but just traveled all the time. It's an intense life. So I actually know what it is to be tested on my patience. We're going to get into that. All right. But I gave this talk recently to a professional group, non-faith-based. And I thought when Chrissy asked, are there some tools? Like, yeah, it's the first tool we teach in Christian leadership and ethics. Let's just see what the Lord does with it, with our time. So let me tell you just a little bit of story. Wall Street story. There's a reason why I gave the Wall Street background. There's this situation where, my role was to be an advisor on deals, whether it was like mergers and acquisitions or in IPO deals. And, there's a lot of money being sloshed around in these decisions. And so their tensions can run high sometimes. People get really protective of their deals. Like the more there's money, right, and time is on the clock, people just aren't their best selves. And that's how you're kind of like tested in that moment. There was a situation we had where we were kind of brought in. It's like a dog and pony show. And I was like part of that process to say, hey, did you want to do business with the firm I was representing at the time? It was Piper Jaffray, which is now Piper Sandler. And I was brought in and I was like one of like 20 people that were showcased. And you get like, it's speed dating. You have like 20 minutes to meet with the people who are selling the transaction or the deal. And you're advising them what you think about the deal. And they're kind of saying, I like that, I don't like that, I like that firm. I mean, it's intense. You got 20 minutes to make the case. And as it turns out, our firm was not picked. So, here I am, not picked in the dog and pony show. It happens. I could have easily just like taken all my toys and wisdom of insight and walked away. But I saw something that they were not seeing in that deal. They wanted to take it public, but I said, you're going to run into these problems if you take this thing public. You actually need to just buy this thing and just do a merger, not actually put it in the public markets. So when I learned that we didn't win the deal, I had options. I could have just walked away, or I could have picked up the phone and done something very unconventional and called the private equity firm and said, here's the free advice that you need to know. I picked up the phone and I called the private equity guy and I said, guess what? Everybody's telling you to take that company public, but here's the risk. You're going to have this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. You're going to have egg on your face if you do that. Here's another course of action that I recommend you do. He was shocked. Like nobody does that, right? You just go, all right, you get what you get and you don't give a fit, right? Like that's usually the Wall Street way. But some things that I've learned in that process are things that ultimately come to what we get to teach in class. And that is, you have to be the same version of yourself in every interaction. The integrity of my research, the integrity of my view was that everybody wanted to do one thing and it was going to probably end in disaster, but it would make all those other firms more money. Or you can just give the truth that needs to be given in a way that's loving and gentle. You got to be the same version of yourself, no matter how much the circumstances tested. The second thing is to be rigorous and follow up. Guess what? That private equity principal that I called that day, I met him for 20 minutes. I could pull up my phone right now and call him and he'd take my call. Because he remembered that I followed up even when I didn't have to follow up that day. Okay, so being rigorous and follow up and following through is such a key and critical thing about building trust. And then the third thing is just to be about others over self and over your own ego. I had nothing to gain. Maybe like some extra sleep. I probably would have turned over and sleep if I didn't call him and tell him. Desiree's laughing because she knows that's what happens. Is my intrusive thoughts would come in about my integrity or my character. But you have to be about other people and just serve in such a way that feels selfless. It's these three elements that come together and form what we call the trust triangle. Just for context too, I know that you're dealing with ministry, but with the little bit I've observed in ministry, like people are people. It doesn't matter what logo is on your door. Okay. Guess what? It just gets a little messier. And I was an elder's daughter. So I wasn't a pastor's. I wasn't a PK. I was an EK. Okay. And so I grew up a lot, staying long, after and learning how to teach myself how to play the piano because I was waiting for dad to finish something, so I actually understand ministry life through the eyes of my dad and how we served growing up. But this just gives you a sense of some of the companies that I've had research on or interactions with and where I've had C-suite relationships with. Here's some additional companies that our firm has active business with in past or current. And there's some that are mentioned that I'm not allowed to mention that also exist. This just gives you a sense of it's a wide range of management teams. And the one thing that is so consistent from management team to management team is that CEOs, pastors, their number one fear, every single one of these companies, their number one fear is having to fire someone. It's actually universal. It's their number one fear. And the reason why I think it's a number one fear is because work was good before sin corrupted it. We're disrupting someone's ability to create when we dismiss from work. But we do live in a fallen world, and we do have to sometimes address HR issues. I'm looking at my HR director. So the best thing I can say, the advice I gave to them is the same advice I give to you. Just be sure you've uncovered every possible tool or angle so that you can sleep well at night knowing you did your personal best. Because you honor your future self knowing you did all of the things. And that helps your own ministry. But I'm just like being real. Like sometimes it's just really hard. People are people. The definition that we teach in Christian leadership and ethics, shout out to my class in the back. Yeah, what's up? Love you guys. They're like, we're here for the attendance. Okay. There's a joy. I love this class. It's upper level. It's typically juniors and seniors, and we have a ton of fun. Right now, by the way, in class, we're reading Eugene Peterson's Long Obedience in the Same Direction. We read it out loud in class, and we discuss it, and we write papers about it. So we're kind of in a good Zen moment in class right now. But this is the definition that we teach in leadership. And I will tell you, I've seen a lot of definitions of leadership, and this still remains my all-time favorite definition. Leadership is what you do in your presence that extends in your absence. Your leadership is actually not defined by your presence. Pastors, hello? Okay? It is not defined by whether or not you've been present in that room. Your leadership is actually defined by what happens when you're not in that room. That is what leadership is. So we have to invest well in our time together and thoughtfully and setting tones and standards and questions and queries so that everybody else does the same thing. That's how you scale your leadership. It's by investing in your presence so that it extends in your absence. Yep. So trust is your presence. That's where you build it. Your trustworthiness is what happens when you're not in the room. Are we seeing that? We're feeling that? It's real simple. We're actually not going to talk. We're going to have a ton of time for Q&A, for interactions. I've got some students who have been willing to sit at your tables, and you can actually float some ideas by them. Do not use names, okay? But like they're actually working active. They've got a whole toolkit of tools of assessing situations, and they can ask you questions to possibly get you to a place of insight and wisdom. They're students. They are equipped students, and they are gaining their experience, and they actually might be tools of joy for you today. All right, let's talk a little bit about trust. This will look familiar to anybody who did classical education. This would be called the Aristotelian three, okay? The three persuasions, ethos, pathos, and logos. These are fancy Latin words. I'll break them down. So this is not my idea. This is actually Aristotle's idea, but really when you look into it, they end up being biblical ideas. You have authenticity, empathy, and then logic and rigor. Your trust is being built on all three of these at all given points in time. Every single human has anchors in some of these areas, and every single human has wobbles. And your circumstances, your environments can actually shift your anchors and your wobbles. We're going to talk about that. For example, I've already mentioned I struggle a little bit with my time and patience. I am an empathy wobbler. I just am. Look, I measure my days in 8,760 hours, an extra 24 in leap year, okay? I build sometimes in 6-minute increments, okay? Like I am on the clock. So when students come to me and they're like, so, Tamminga, I'm thinking about, I'm like, hurry it up. Okay, so like my family calls me bullet point Neely, okay? That tells you what my empathy wobble is. My anchor, however, is in logic and rigor and also in authenticity. I know this about myself, and so I can manage my own self-assessments these ways. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit as well. All right, let's break some of these down. So logic and rigor. Let's talk about it's my favorite one. Okay, so let's talk about logic and rigor. Credibility. It's what it is. Are you credible? It's what you do or don't do if you're wobbling. Can you deliver on what it is that you say you can do? Have you ever had people come to your ministry and say, oh yeah, I totally know how to play the piano? And you're like, I needed more than Mary had a little lamb, okay? So, that would be a logic and rigor wobble if they came in with that time and that circumstance. Or this is a great area for when you're interviewing people, you can actually ask around credentialing, right? Or tell me more about, like, I can see that, you're very Holy Spirit discerning, et cetera. But can you start listing off all the times and circumstances that you dealt with this issue, A, B, and C, and get them to really tell you the stories behind how they dealt with A, B, and C? Or maybe they did go get a degree in pastoral counseling, or they're pursuing some sort of additional academic rigor. This is where knowledge can come through. This is where skills can come through. But if someone is having a problem on wobbling in credibility, and you can see it maybe even in your team, and you're like, man, they're a really good person, super empathetic. They are the same person privately as they are publicly, but man, they are just wobbling on their credibility and their follow through. The recommendation I have for you is actually to pursue them into a place of getting them more skill development. That's probably how they need to amp up their skill development. You don't just dismiss that person. You'll lose sleep if you do that later on in life. You actually get them into a pathway of skill development. Okay. Time management. This would be a key one. This is why we're in college, learning how to be good time managers, which, by the way, also means doesn't completing everything and being perfect, as I have to sometimes talk to my high performers. It's also knowing what you can say no to or be willing to take an 80% on because you're choosing to manage your time in other spaces, right? That your heart matter isn't about going to be perfect, but rather you're going for optimization. Because sometimes we have to learn. I'm looking at some of the mamas here, right? Sorry, dads, but I'm looking at some of the mamas. I mean, Jonathan, you did just tell me you have 4 kids, which that happened since you were here last. Okay. Sometimes I tell students this. I'm like, my husband and I were married for 10 years before we became parents. The day I became a mom, I was like super sad. I was like, I could have cured cancer with the last 10 years. I had so much time on my hands. Like, you don't know what you don't have until you like lose it. And you're like, okay, time management. So we like to practice that time management in college. Also just learning what your organizational tools are. I live and die by my calendar. If it's not on my calendar, it didn't happen. Okay. So, if you need my time, you get on the calendar. Sometimes students like, I've emailed you 3 times. I'm like, best chance, get on my calendar and I'll answer your email when you're on my calendar. Okay. Like that's how it's going to work. Live and die by my calendar. So logic and rigor, I can follow through on what it is I say I can do, and I can do it with skills and credibility. All right, empathy. This is my wobble. This is around sincerity. Like, it's not just what you do, it's how you do what you do. I had to apologize to a student actually just yesterday. I was trying so hard because I've been behind on grading to get something graded, and I foolishly kept my door open yesterday. That student is not in this room, just in case students are like, is it me? I'm like, no. And a student walked in and said, Tamminga, can I have some minutes? And I really didn't want to give minutes. I also shouldn't have kept my door open. My response, like my physical response, was subpar. I didn't pause and ask for the Holy Spirit's extra measure of presence. And I said, I'm really sorry for that response. I just wasn't expecting the disruption today. But I want to tell you, I know Jesus put you in my office. So let's spend time. So I was able to recover, but you have to hear what I just did. I apologize literally in the moment. I just didn't presume that he would give me the grace. That's called peacemaking. Too often churches try to do peacekeeping. Okay? Peacemaking is the act of building micro moments of trust. Am I caring about others and their interests? This is where we learn listening skills, active listening skills. We actually learn how to do active listening skills in our class. We do a lot of discussion-based conversations, moderation, kind of how you facilitate conversations, not just presentations, but how do you facilitate conversations in a way that brings honor to everyone in the room. You practice attention, you practice presence. So we really work on what is good hygiene around that. And just overall, how do you remain kind of allowing yourself to be exposed so that you can engage even if it's not in your natural tendency? I am naturally an introvert. If any of the tables that I met today, they're like, you are not an introvert. I'm like, no, the Lord calls me to be engaged with his people. You don't see me at night when I cocoon for 4 hours. Okay, that's what you don't see. All right. Authenticity. Ooh, this is one of my favorite ones. Okay. Everyone's like, oh, so authentic. I'm like, let's define authenticity. Okay. Authenticity can be described as reliable in that that person reliably shows up privately the same way that they would show up publicly. That you would never have multiple versions told about you. I had someone I used to work with, and the name came up, and I said, "Oh yeah, I really enjoy that person." And they're like, "Huh." I'm like, "What version do you have that I don't have?" It wasn't that that person was right or wrong, but that response shouldn't be, "Huh." It's a good question. Am I actually showing up as the same person in every interaction? Or do I try to gain favor by being a certain way in certain circumstances? This is the one I think we struggle with actually the most. It's probably the number one HR issue I have dealt with is when people have to be managed by inauthentic people. I'm telling you, people, work on it. Make sure you do not have inauthentic leaders because it is really hard for your people to know how to respond. You waste way more time trying to figure out people instead of figuring out how to serve people. All right, so know yourself. You got to know your why. This is what like the world would tell you. You need to view people though based on who they are and not reactions, and you got to practice your pause for poise. So let me give you an example. Because we get to talk about faith things. This is why I love teaching at North Central. Do you ever have it when you're interacting with someone and they just trigger you? I'm like trying not to make super eye contact at anyone or spouses right now. Okay. All right. You're just triggered. You're absolutely just like triggered by that person. That trigger, we actually learn this in class, by the way. We identify what our top 5 values are because that trigger is a response to actually something you hold as a top 5 value. And that person has no idea what you hold as a top 5 value. So, for example, I'll just talk autobiographically. Safety and security. It's one of my top 5 values. We have a whole process that we walk through to like get to those top 5 values. It's like, I don't know, 35 to choose from or something like that. Yeah, I got some head nods. Safety and security. I am so triggered when it's icy outside in Minnesota because, and I'm like, I'm going to fall. 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 If I allow myself to be angry at our facilities management team for not having iced something that day, I will damage a relationship. I will damage the Lord's name. I will damage the ministry of unity. I will damage trust. I need to actually know why I'm being triggered in that moment because I am responsible for my responses. Right? Okay. So that trigger, though, is how you need to go, pause. Pause. Wait, why am I so angry? Why? Okay. Oh. And then you start assessing what's behind that trigger so that you don't become a different version of who you are privately as you are. Facilities management shouldn't have a different version of me relative to Dr. Leibengood. It should be the same version of me. So that's how we do it, kind of internalizing it. But then this is what gets really, really crazy and kind of like, okay. If I'll just say Dr. Leibengood, she's a safe person. All right. If she finds me in a place of being triggered, her job as a leader of me, because she is my boss, is to see me for how God sees me and not see me for how I'm being triggered. And in fact, masterclass leadership, which she is very good at, are things like, hey, you seem a little off today. Is it because it's icy outside? Do you need to park closer? Immediately relieved in that moment. Do you see that? Okay, that is your job as the pastor, as the boss of the people. You need to get real captive your own triggers and understand what your top values are and making sure you understand. You got to take care of yourself, the oxygen mask, right? You got to put it on yourself, on your triggers, so that you can serve others and get them real quick back to their identity of who they are in God. Okay. All right, let's talk about trustworthiness. If those are the components of trust, trustworthiness are all the little interactions and building blocks. That's how you scale. That's how your reputation goes before you, because you've had all of the interactions that have been authentic and all of the interactions that have followed through and all of the interactions that show I care deeply about my colleague Pamela. She knows it, right? Like, it's not that it's once, it's that it's always. That's what trustworthiness is. It's crazy though. Once, like, one little block out though, and something feels off. So it feels like a high calling because it is. Okay. So here's what I want us to do. Enough of me talking. I want you to turn your tables a little bit, and I want you to think through, where do you think you anchor? And in what circumstances do you anchor that? So, for example, are you just like absolutely the most logical, rigorous, always follow through skills person like me in all your circumstances? Or are there some areas in your life that maybe you wobble in your follow through? So do a little reflection and talk, because we turn to talk. It's not about me talking, it's about you guys talking and about you guys growing. And just, yeah, have a little chat about your anchors, and then I'll ask for a couple of people to maybe share out. I think some of you are already doing this, but now talk about your wobbles. Because what's funny is, how many people started talking about their wobbles before their anchors? Uh-huh. It's so human nature. Okay. So be sure you're talking about both at your table, but let me just share some observations that I heard. One, this beautiful table over here. Jennifer, sweetheart, I am okay. I wobble in logic. I walk over there. I'm like, oh, tell me, what do you learn? She's like, I'm failing at everything. I'm like, oh, I am never getting invited back. Okay. All right. That is not the goal. Okay. Clearly I've totally empathy wobbled in like making you feel like a destroyed person. Okay. So, no, there's some interesting and beautiful things there. I think we're all on a path of forward momentum. Like, I think that's key to remember, and that we're all a work that's under construction. I mean, there are Bible verses about being under construction, are there not? So, does anybody know that about Ruth Bell Graham, what her epitaph says? Does anybody know this? I went to go to in North Carolina, I went to go see the farm, and it overwhelmed me, the Grahams, where they're buried. And Ruth Bell Graham, the saint that she is, her gravestone says, under construction, thank you for your patience. Isn't that precious? I know. I'm like, Ruth Bell Graham. Okay. Anyway, that was a side note. Nerdy Graham trivia. There you go. But I think what some other things that I hear over here is, Jennifer had said, hey, we need to actually do an assessment with each other. Here's what's super fascinating. God is amazing. I could be fully empathetic and you would never know it. You actually I don't need you to define whether or not I'm empathetic. I could just sit in a room and just like cry because I'm being empathetic about something, right? I can actually be logical and rigorous without any of you knowing what's going on in my life. You don't see me in front of my Excel spreadsheets and know how neat and tidy they are, right? I cannot be determined authentic unless I'm in the community. You need people around you to assess whether or not your authenticity is actually coming through. God confirms us in many ways in community, right? And accountability. So I think what you're bringing out there is a really, really wise point, Jennifer, is if there's conviction going on here, the conversation would just be like, oh, we should just like make sure we're actually all talking about this, that we have a language of assessment. We talk about this leadership continuum. I don't have a picture of it here, but we talk about this leadership continuum that too often the generation of students that we receive come in with the social media, right, sort of perspective. And, they see awesome, amazing pastors and they're seeing like great scale and everything else. Leadership actually begins all the way back over at assessment. You go from assessment to action, action to influence, and then influence to scale. You have to do it in that order. Otherwise, you'll end up scaling chaos, right? So we spend almost our entire class, like 80% of our class is in like assessment tools, this trust triangle being one of them. So yes, do the assessment. Your instincts, you're not failing at anything, Jennifer. You're winning at it all. Okay. All right. You're winning at it all. And then, I think too, just this idea, remind me your name. Brad. I was like, I knew it was a B. Okay. Brad. Brad said, hey, I'm authentic and I'm empathetic, but my wife's like the planner. She's like the logical, rigorous person. Okay, exactly. We actually need to know who in our organization we need to lean in and yield to and not actually overassert our personality or our tendencies on them, but rather yield to their strengths and their anchors. That is what makes a flywheel of growth and success and growth mindset organizations work, is when someone feels valued by being leaned on in their anchors instead of discredited because of their anchors. Because maybe I don't identify with that anchor. Great example. My business partner, I have a business partner. She's very strong in planning, very logical, very rigorous, but like also like a significant planner. When we worked together in Wall Street, we didn't have to really have a plan because Wall Street just creates your plan, your life, and you just yield to the plan. And until we started our own consultancy, I didn't actually see how important planning was to her. Because I would show up on a Monday and be like, oh my gosh, I did the most amazing research and this is so good. And we got to like get out there and write this thing. And we got to go like cast some vision and go get some biz dev. And it was driving her bonkers. And she didn't have words for it until we actually brought in a third party to kind of help us figure this out. And we did an assessment. And I was like, oh, you start with planning. I'm like, I hand the plan off to you when I'm done, ready to I just scream chaos to you and then just allow you to pick up the pieces. Like, does that not work for you? Okay. It apparently does not. Okay. So we learned a new language. On Friday afternoons, I will say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this research for this thing next week. Does that fit our plan? Just by me considering that need for her to plan heading into the weekend de-stresses her weekend, knowing that she'll show up on Monday because she knew what I was going to do over the weekend. Do you see that? So that's leaning in to her strengths. All right, be sure you're talking about your wobbles. And really where I want to land today is just this trustworthiness. I'm going to get to more conversation. Trustworthiness. That leads to more assurance, less anxiety, and that's when you unlock momentum. Leadership is what you do in your presence, building all those little blocks of trust that extends in your absence. And it's when you're absent that momentum actually unlocks. Dr. Leibengood's really good at this. She spends really quality time with her people. And she knows, as academic leadership, she knows we can come to her with anything. And we build trust that way. And so when she knows, she hears something that's different from our conversation, right? She knows, it doesn't sound like something Neely would say, right? But it gives her the ability to lead well others so that we unlock significant momentum as an organization.